This is Babis Ananiastopoulos. Her daughter, his wife, murdered just a few weeks before. But now police say that he was the murderer who nearly concealed his crime.
From jealous lovers to calculated manipulators, these killers shocked the world with their crimes. From Alec Blair's brutal murder to Dustin Lee Honke's ruthless crimes, uncover the stories and the sentences that brought some justice to these devastating tragedies, but left the family shattered and the world in disbelief. Let's begin.
Clevenger's body found near the intersection of State Route 96 and Bowman Road. Her husband, Alec Blair, charged with the murder.
On February 10, 2020, Alec Blair, a 22-year-old from Shelby, Ohio, made a tragic decision. He promised his ex-wife, Gabarian Gabe Clevenger, they would peacefully finalize their divorce. But instead, his jealousy and anger took over. Alec lured her to his home, where he brutally ended her life. This shocking act devastated the community, leaving loved ones heartbroken and struggling to understand how such a tragedy could happen. Blair had been struggling to move on from his 8-month marriage with Clevenger. Despite their separation, he couldn't let her go. On the day of the crime, he promised Gabe they would go to the courthouse to finalize their divorce, offering her a sense of closure. But instead, he led her to the driveway of his own home. There, his feelings of jealousy and rejection took over. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, he attacked her with a knife, stabbing her 14 times. The violence was so extreme that the wounds nearly severed her head. Once the attack was over, he showed no sign of remorse. Then, Blair disposed of her body in a field near a cell tower in Jackson Township and went to work as if nothing had happened and went back to his normal life, as though nothing had changed. When he was questioned, he confessed to the crime and led authorities to where he had left her. The courtroom was filled with tension as Alec Blair stood trial for his heinous act. In October 2020, he pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. His chilling confession and lack of remorse were highlighted during the trial.
I was just trying to kind of talking to her and wanting her to tell me, the truth, just tell me. And she said she was talking at first that I know of, and then basically that's it, and then
Dr. Robert Stinson, a forensic psychologist, testified about Blair's history of mental health struggles and anger management issues. However, the prosecution focused on the savagery of the crime, calling it an act of pure rage and jealousy. Blair's written statement revealed his twisted emotions. He claimed to still love Clevenger, but admitted to being overwhelmed by reminders of her, which drove him crazy. His remorse, while expressed, rang hollow to those who had lost a daughter, sister, and friend. Judge Phil Naumoff sentenced Alec Blair to 45 years to life in prison, stating he agonized over the decision. Blair would not be eligible for parole until 2064, at the age of 67. The judge acknowledged Blair's young age and remorse, but emphasized the brutality of the crime. In her victim impact statement, Clevenger's mother, Love Lance, called Blair a monster and expressed her profound hatred for him. Prosecutor Gary Bishop described the act as premeditated and fueled by petty jealousy. The courtroom was heavy with emotion as Judge Phil Naumoff sentenced Alec Blair to 45 years to life in prison. You could see the judge struggle, torn between his feelings and the law. He knew Blair was young, but the horror of what he had done could not be ignored. Blair would not be eligible for parole until he was 67 in 2064. Clevenger's mother, Love Lance, took the stand with a heart full of pain and anger. She called Blair a monster, her words filled with the weight of a mother's grief. Her hatred for him was clear as she shared the unthinkable loss of her daughter. Prosecutor Gary Bishop spoke with conviction, describing the murder as something that was not an accident. It was planned, driven by petty jealousy. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated act of rage. As Blair sat there silent, the courtroom was filled with a deep, unsettling sorrow, knowing that no matter the sentence, it could never bring back Gabarian or ease the pain of her loved ones. The courtroom was filled with grief and anger. Clevenger's family and friends struggled to come to terms with their loss. Many held signs outside the courthouse demanding justice for Gabarian. Throughout the entire trial, Alec Blair showed no sign of remorse, no hint of sorrow for the life he had taken. But as the judge pronounced his sentence, something changed. A single tear rolled down his cheek, the first and only visible sign of emotion from a man who had seemed so cold. Yet, for those who loved Gabarian, no sentence could undo the pain caused by his actions. Alec Blair's brutal act of killing shows how dangerous jealousy can be, but Matthew Locke's devastating actions show just how far some will go in their darkest moments.
A rare man convicted of murdering a woman and her 3 children in West Brookfield was just sentenced to life in prison without parole.
On March 1st, 2018, police were called to a home on Old Warren Road in West Brookfield, Massachusetts, for a well-being check. What they found was a scene that would haunt the community for years. Inside an upstairs bedroom lay the bodies of Sarah Bermudez, a 38-year-old mother, and her 3 children, Madison, 8, James, 6, and Michael, 2. Their lives had been brutally taken, and the house bore evidence of an attempted fire. DNA and other clues soon pointed to the person responsible for this ruthless crime, 38-year-old Matthew Locke, Sarah's cousin's husband. Locke's actions on that tragic day stemmed from a desperate and destructive binge. According to prosecutors, he was searching for money or substances when he killed Sarah and her children in cold blood. To cover his tracks, he set a fire in the house, but it burned itself out, leaving behind crucial evidence. Locke's DNA was found on 2 of the victims, tying him irrefutably to the crime scene. This wasn't Locke's first violent act. In 2010, he had set fire to his ex-girlfriend's property in Maine while she and her children were inside. Although they survived, Locke served time for that crime. However, his dark tendencies resurfaced in 2018 with devastating consequences. After years of investigation, Matthew Locke finally faced trial, and the seriousness of his crimes weighed heavily on everyone in the courtroom. The prosecutors presented their case clearly, showing how Locke had planned and carried out the brutal murders. They explained how he not only killed Sarah and her 3 children, but also tried to hide his actions of armed burglary and arson by setting fires and breaking into their home.
A little more than a month ago, Locke was found guilty of killing his cousin's wife, 38-year-old Sarah Bermudez, and her 3 children.
The jury listened carefully and made their decision, guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder, burglary, and arson. On Thursday, justice was finally served in Worcester Superior Court. District Attorney Joe Early spoke to the court with emotion, calling the murders some of the worst his office had ever seen. His words showed how deeply this tragedy affected the community and the strong commitment of everyone involved to bring justice for Sarah and her children. Matthew Locke sat silently in the courtroom as the judge announced his punishment. He was sentenced to 4 life terms, 1 for each of the murders he committed, ensuring he would never leave prison. But still, he shows no remorse for his act. On top of that, he received 2 more sentences of 19 to 20 years for armed burglary and arson, but those would be served at the same time. This meant Locke would spend the rest of his life behind bars, unable to hurt anyone else. A life once full of decisions was now reduced to a prison cell, justice delivered for the innocent lives he had taken.
Who killed his cousin's wife and her 3 children has learned that he'll spend life behind bars. Matthew Locke cried as the victim's loved ones read impact statements.
Each member of my family deserves their own particular, their own justice as an individual, even as a whole.
For the family and friends of Sarah Bermudez and her children, this day marked a bittersweet victory. While nothing could bring back the victims, the sentencing provided a sense of closure. The courtroom felt the weight of justice as Locke's fate was sealed. While Locke's crime was born from a substance-fueled rage, what about Babis Anagnostopoulos' chilling betrayal, which was crafted from a web of lies?
This is Babis Anagnostopoulos. Her daughter, his wife, murdered just a few weeks before. But now police say that he was the murderer who nearly concealed his crime.
Babis Anagnostopoulos seemed to have it all: charm, good looks, and a successful career as a helicopter pilot. But on May 11, 2021, his life took a shocking turn. His wife, Caroline Crouch, was found dead in their Athens home, and Babis initially claimed that armed robbers had killed her. As the investigation unfolded, cracks in his story began to appear. Digital evidence and inconsistencies in his timeline led to a confession. Babis admitted to murdering Caroline in a fit of anger, unraveling the life he had carefully constructed, leaving a trail of heartbreak and betrayal in his wake. On May 11, 2021, Caroline Crouch, a British Greek woman, was found dead in her home in Glyconera, Athens. Her husband, Babis, initially claimed that a gang of robbers had broken into their home, killed the family dog, and murdered Caroline. He even pretended to be a victim, bound and gagged by the supposed thieves.
Κατάφερες και πήρες τηλέφωνο.
Όταν συνειδητοποίησα ότι η γυναίκα σου δεν βρίσκεται στη ζωή.
Όταν με έλυσαν οι αστυνομοί. Όταν ήρθαν οι αστυνομοί μέσα και με έλυσαν και έβγαλαν από το κεφάλι μου τα δεσμά.
His account seemed believable, but over the next few weeks, investigators started to notice discrepancies. No evidence of a break-in, no fingerprints or DNA from any thieves, and suspicious details about his own devices began to raise questions. As the investigation into Caroline Crouch's death progressed, investigators began to notice unsettling discrepancies in Babis Anagnostopoulos' story. Digital evidence from the couple's devices painted a different picture than the one he had described. Surveillance footage revealed that the timeline he had given, claiming that robbers had broken in at 4:30 a.m., was false. The evidence showed that their memory card from the security camera had been removed hours earlier, and Caroline's biometric watch indicated her heart stopped beating at 4:11 a.m. Additionally, data from Babis's mobile phone revealed activity during the time he claimed to have been tied up and unable to move. With mounting pressure from the investigators, Babis eventually cracked and confessed. He admitted that the so-called robbery was a fabrication designed to cover up the truth. The real motive was a troubled marriage marked by constant arguments. In a fit of anger, Babis murdered Caroline, ending her life in cold blood. In a tense and dramatic trial, Babis Anagnostopoulos was found guilty of premeditated murder for the death of his wife, Caroline Crouch, as well as animal mistreatment for killing the family dog. The court heard how Babis had meticulously staged a robbery to cover up the crime, playing the role of a grieving husband and father, even as he falsely blamed foreign thieves for the murder. However, investigators uncovered discrepancies in his story, leading to his confession after a thorough examination of digital evidence. In the end, the jury sentenced Babis to life in prison for Caroline's murder, along with an additional 10 years for killing the dog and misleading authorities. He was also ordered to pay a fine of €21,000. Despite his calculated efforts to manipulate the public's perception of him, the truth eventually caught up with him, leaving a family shattered and a nation in disbelief over his betrayal. What had started as a tragic story of a young mother's death quickly turned into one of betrayal and heartbreak. People across Greece and the world felt deceived by Babis's cold manipulation. His confession shattered the image of a grieving husband and loving father, replacing it with one of a man who had fooled an entire nation. Caroline's family, devastated by her loss, won custody of her daughter Lydia, who would grow up far from the man who had taken her mother's life. The emotional toll of this case rippled through the media, and the story of how Babis Anagnostopoulos fooled the world resonated deeply with audiences around the globe. Babis's absence of remorse underscores the disturbing nature of his crime, setting the stage for Marvin Patterson's equally harrowing story.
A 19-year-old charged with murdering his ex-girlfriend. Marvin Patterson was in a car with 18-year-old Kiara Brown when he pointed a gun at her and it went off.
In March 2018, a tragic shooting occurred in Milwaukee near 99th and Carmen. 18-year-old Kiara Brown was fatally shot by 20-year-old Marvin Patterson. The shooting happened when Patterson claimed that he had accidentally pointed the gun at Kiara's head and it went off. This incident left a grieving family behind, especially Kiara's mother, Kenesha Brown Perry, who is now struggling to cope with the loss of her daughter. Marvin Patterson was arrested and charged with the shooting death of Kiara Brown, but the case quickly became complicated. Initially, Patterson confessed to the crime, and it seemed like the case would be straightforward. However, problems arose during the trial. Key evidence, including Patterson's police interview, was thrown out due to violations of his Miranda rights, which meant that his statements could not be used against him. To make matters worse, the state's key witness failed to appear in court, leaving the prosecution with little to support their case. With the evidence weakened, Patterson was able to negotiate a plea deal. Instead of facing charges of murder, he pled guilty to a lesser offense, significantly reducing the severity of his punishment. What seemed like a clear-cut case of justice soon turned into a legal battle marked by missteps and missed opportunities. On October 10, 2019, Marvin Patterson was sentenced to just 10 years in total, 5 years in prison, and an additional 5 years of extended supervision. However, with credit for time already served, Patterson would likely spend less than 4 years behind bars. For the Brown family, the sentencing was a painful reminder of the justice they felt they had been denied. Kiara Brown's tragic death left a deep wound, and the light punishment handed down to Patterson only seemed to deepen that hurt. The family struggled to understand how someone who had taken their loved one's life could face such a brief sentence. As Patterson's release loomed, the Brown family felt a sense of injustice, knowing that the man responsible for Kiara's death would spend far less time incarcerated than they had hoped for, leaving them to grapple with the emotional toll of the loss and the perceived unfairness of the verdict. Despite the ruling, Kiara's mother, Kenesha Brown Perry, expressed her dismay, saying that the sentence felt like a slap in the face. She described her frustration with the justice system, saying that the sentence did not reflect the gravity of her daughter's death, and said, "Sorry doesn't bring my daughter back." The case was far from providing the closure she had hoped for.
Care how sorry he is, because sorry is not going to bring my daughter back.
Kenesha Brown Perry's heartbreak and disappointment were evident. She felt the sentence failed to bring justice for her daughter and that Marvin Patterson's punishment was far too lenient. "I wanted it to feel like justice," she said, expressing how she would never feel at peace with the outcome. As time passed, Patterson was set to be released from prison around the same time Kiara was killed, adding to the emotional weight of her family. Marvin's act of crime was hard to believe, but Dustin Lee Honke's actions remind us of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors.
An Iowa meth kingpin convicted of killing 5 people was executed today in Indiana.
In the summer of 1993, Dustin Lee Honke, a substance manufacturer, and his girlfriend Angela Johnson embarked on a chilling crime spree in Iowa. Their actions led to the disappearance and murder of 5 individuals, including 2 young children. This tragic case became one of the most notorious in Iowa's history and culminated in a federal trial that exposed the dark lengths Honke went to in order to silence witnesses and protect his substance empire. Honke's descent into violence began when Greg Nicholson, one of his trusted dealers, decided to cooperate with federal authorities after Honke's indictment on substance trafficking charges. Nicholson's willingness to testify posed a grave threat to Honke's substance empire. Fearing that his entire operation would crumble under Nicholson's testimony, Honke, along with his girlfriend Angela Johnson, devised a sinister plan to silence him. Their ruthlessness escalated when they not only murdered his best friend Nicholson, but also targeted his girlfriend, Lori Duncan, and her 2 young daughters, 10-year-old Candy and 6-year-old Amber. Their deaths served as a chilling message to anyone considering betrayal. Months later, Honke and Johnson's spree of violence continued with the murder of another potential witness, Terry DeGoose. Johnson's involvement wasn't merely as an accomplice. She played a central role in enabling Honke's crimes, driven by loyalty and the dangerous desire to protect his empire at any cost. The turning point came in 2000 when Angela Johnson unknowingly provided a fellow inmate with detailed maps revealing the locations of the victim's grave. These maps led authorities to the remains of Nicholson, Duncan, her daughters, and DeGoose. All 5 victims had been brutally executed. Nicholson and Duncan were bound and shot, while the children were killed with single gunshots to their heads. These discoveries reopened investigations and provided the evidence needed to prosecute Honke and Johnson for their heinous crimes. In 2004, after a complex trial involving over 50 witnesses and extensive evidence, Honke was convicted on 17 counts, including witness tampering and murder while engaged in substance trafficking. The jury imposed the death penalty for the murders of Candy and Amber Duncan, and life imprisonment for the murders of the adults. Honke's elaborate schemes to silence witnesses and evade justice had ultimately failed. As the verdict was delivered, the courtroom bore witness to a mix of emotions. Family members of the victims shed tears of relief, their grief mingled with the solace of justice finally served. Many expressed sorrow for the senseless loss of 5 lives, particularly the innocent children, whose futures were stolen in an instant. Members of law enforcement and the legal team shared quiet nods of acknowledgement, reflecting on the years of painstaking work that culminated in this moment. The gravity of the crimes was palpable, and the sentencing brought a somber closure to a harrowing chapter. The case of Dustin Honke leaves an indelible scar, especially for the families of the victims. The calculated and ruthless nature of the crimes is a sobering reminder of the depths of human depravity. Honke's conviction brought a measure of justice, but the tragedy of 5 lives lost, particularly 2 innocent children, remains a haunting legacy. The courtroom's reaction underscores the enduring impact of these crimes, ensuring the memory of the victims would never fade. Next, we turn to the tragic case of Andre Rebello, whose actions left a family shattered and a community reeling.
Cheers. Cheers. In 2020, Andre Rebello was a 24-year-old cryptocurrency trader living with his then-partner, popular model and social media.
In 2020, Andre Rebello, a prominent cryptocurrency investor, found himself at the center of a murder case that captivated the media and the public. It all began when the body of Andre's mother was discovered at her home in Bicton, Perth, Australia. The circumstances surrounding her death raised numerous questions, and Andre found himself facing multiple charges, including murder.
4 fraud charges, which related to instances where he tried to recover the insurance money, including forging his mother's last will and testament.
During the trial, which took place in November 2024, the prosecution presented a compelling argument suggesting that Andre's motive for the murder was not as innocent as he had claimed. They alleged that the real reason he was at his mother's house on April 25, 2020, several hours before her body was found, was to carry out a sinister deed. According to the prosecution, Andre intended to take advantage of his mother's life insurance policy and reap the financial benefits. To support this claim, the prosecution presented evidence that Andre had led an expensive lifestyle, which required him to keep up appearances on social media. They argued that Andre's need for financial backing led him to commit the heinous crime. Andre, for his part, admitted to fraud charges related to his efforts to claim insurance, but vehemently denied the charge of murder. Andre claimed that he and his mother were discussing life insurance on the morning she was tragically killed. According to Andre, This conversation was merely a hypothetical scenario, and there was no intention to defraud anyone. As the trial progressed, the courtroom was witness to a clash of narratives and conflicting evidence. The prosecution painted a picture of a cunning and calculating son who murdered his own mother to secure his financial future. On the other hand, Andre's defense team argued that their client was innocent and was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Instagram star and model Grace Piscopo broke his silence after being accused of his partner mother. Andre Rebello was.
However, the prosecutor argued that the case was not as simple as it appeared. According to the prosecution, the sole motive for Andre's visit to his mother's home on April 25th was to take her life. They presented evidence to back up this claim, including testimony from Grace Piscopo, a social media influencer who had been in a relationship with Andre in 2020 when he was arrested.
Was detained after his mother was found in a Perth house in 2020. Watch the video above. Detectives talk about Andre Rebello's.
But before Grace took the witness stand, the prosecution presented crucial evidence in the form of cell phone records from Andre's phone. These records show that Grace attempted to contact Andre over 10 times between 11:10 a.m. and 11:35 a.m., sending several texts and begging him to answer his phone. The prosecution alleged that this was the time when Andre killed his mother. However, Grace testified that Andre typically left his phone on silent, which frustrated her when she couldn't reach him.
Cryptocurrency trader living with his then partner, popular model and social media influencer Grace Piscopo, and their 18-month-old child.
During cross-examination, Grace rejected the prosecutor's allegation that she was trying to protect Andre. She maintained that she had reached out to him because she genuinely cared about his well-being. However, the prosecution argued that her desperate attempts to reach Andre backed up her claims that he was involved in his mother's murder. Andre's fate hangs in the balance as the trial winds to a close. The reaction to Rebello's situation has been a mix of shock and disbelief. Many are struggling to understand how someone who seemingly has it all could be involved in such a heinous crime. To the public, the mere fact that a person with so much going for them could allegedly commit such a heinous act has left many questioning the very nature of humanity. Media coverage of the case has also played a role in shaping the public's perception of Andre Rebello, as the constant coverage of the investigation contributed to the dissemination of information and fueled the public's curiosity. This constant exposure has created a strong emotional response as people try to make sense of the situation. Andre Rebello's alleged murder of his mother shocked Australia. However, Nathaniel Huey Jr.'s case is nothing short of heinous, one that will leave you questioning the depths of human depravity.
It started here on this Romeoville block September 17th, 2023, as a wellness check. Alberto Rolón, Zoraida Bartolome, their two boys, ages 7 and 9, lived in the home.
In September 2023, a tragic incident unfolded. Nathaniel Huey Jr., a 26-year-old individual, lost his life in a car crash during a high-speed police chase. What made this pursuit even more tragic was the fact that Huey Jr. was the prime suspect in a triple murder that had shaken the community. The victims, Zoraida Bartolome, Alberto Rolón, and their two sons, Adriel and Diego, along with their two dogs, were all senselessly killed. In the aftermath of these heinous crimes, loved ones of the victims set up a GoFundMe page to express their grief and pay tribute to the lost souls.
A well-being check, but they were all dead. Zoraida Bartolome, Alberto Rolón, and their two young sons, Adriel and Diego.
Zoraida and Alberto were described as hardworking people who dedicated their lives to providing for their families. Their sons, Adriel and Diego, were described as the sweetest and most innocent angels who could hug anyone's worries away. The page expressed that the world would be much darker without these four.
Palomo and her fiancé, Nathaniel Huey Jr. Police say to extinguish a love affair between Huey and the married Bartolome. According to these crime records obtained tonight by the I-Team,
once Nathaniel Huey Jr. was identified as the prime suspect in the murders, the police issued an alert to nearby agencies, warning their fellow officers that Huey Jr. had extensive firearm training. This information further intensified the search for Huey Jr., as authorities recognized the potential threat he posed.
It looked like she was being held against the roof.
A new report from Romeoville police obtained by NBC5 News paints a much different picture. So who was Ermelinda Palomo, and why was that Romeoville family...
Several days later, in Catoosa, police spotted Nathaniel Huey Jr. driving a car and attempted to pull him over. However, Nathaniel Huey Jr. sped off instead of stopping, leading to a chase on Interstate 44. During the chase, Nathaniel lost control of his vehicle and crashed. The car caught fire, engulfing it in flames.
Armed and dangerous murder suspect.
Out of where?
Illinois, I think.
An Oklahoma officer on scene tries to piece together who they were.
She's the missing person, endangered. He's the murderer.
Officers who were present at the scene of the crash reported that they had heard 2 gunshots before the incident. Upon approaching the vehicle, they discovered a woman inside. The woman, identified as Ermelinda Palomo, sustained a gunshot wound. Emergency personnel rushed Ermelinda to the hospital, but she succumbed to her injuries upon arrival.
Suspect.
Another isn't so sure.
It looked like she was being held against the wheel.
A new report from Romeoville police obtained by NBC5 News paints a much different picture.
Inside the burning car, police found Nathaniel Huey Jr., also dead from a gunshot wound. According to Ermelinda's family, Ermelinda was Nathaniel Huey Jr.'s fiancée. She was also a mother of 5 and had 5 grandchildren. The family stated that Ermelinda had made strange statements that made it seem as though she would never return home the last time they had seen her.
But an investigation revealed a year of manipulation and deceit. Police say Palomo was aware of the affair Nathaniel was having with Zoraida. They say investigators analyzed iCloud backup records.
Initially, the police couldn't wrap their heads around why Nathaniel Huey Jr. would have committed such a heinous crime. Why would a seemingly normal man decide to commit such a horrific crime? But as time passed, a shocking revelation that would change everything came to light.
And found Palomo created multiple fake online profiles and phone numbers to communicate with Huey. He thought he was talking to members of a Mexican cartel that had ties to Palomo.
In October 2024, a report surfaced that Nathaniel Huey Jr. had been having an affair with his coworker, Zoraida. When his fiancée, Ermelinda, found out, she took matters into her own hands. Further investigation revealed that Ermelinda, Nathaniel's fiancée, was behind the tragic events that unfolded. She had apparently used fake social media accounts to catfish Nathaniel, convincing him he was part of a crime organization.
To committing the murders to a police informant because people were after him. The officer's report says there's no reason to believe Huey ever knew she was the one behind the account.
Ermelinda's elaborate plan involved creating a web of deceit and manipulation, ultimately leading to a tragic outcome. 2 days before the brutal murders of the Bartolome family, Ermelinda successfully managed to plant the seed of doubt in Nathaniel's mind. She convinced him his lover, Zoraida, was the real threat through her carefully crafted lies and manipulation. Nathaniel had no idea that it was Ermelinda playing a dangerous game behind the account.
And he likely died in Oklahoma without ever knowing that truth. Romeoville's police chief says nothing can justify a senseless act of violence, and this case unfortunately does not mean closure for so many continuing to grieve.
Nathaniel Huey Jr., driven by fear and paranoia, acted upon Ermelinda's twisted manipulations. On that fateful night, Ermelinda accompanied Nathaniel to the Bartolome home. While Nathaniel went inside, Ermelinda remained in the car, her sinister plan set in motion. Inside the Bartolome home, Nathaniel pulled out a 9mm pistol and opened fire on the family of 4 and their 2 dogs. The deaths of Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermelinda Palomo, before they could be arrested and face trial for their crimes, generated a sense of outrage and relief among the victims' families. On the one hand, they were deeply upset that justice would not be served in the usual manner. However, on the other hand, they felt a sense of relief knowing that they would not be subjected to a lengthy and distressing trial. Nathaniel Huey Jr.'s violent actions left a trail of devastation, but the next case unravels a sinister betrayal. David Swift, a man whose dark secrets and calculated moves turned a seemingly normal life into a tragic tale of deception and loss.
She was just a wonderful mother. She would do anything for her children. They were number one in her life. They came before anything else.
On October 30th, 2011, Karen Swift, a 44-year-old woman, vanished without a trace from her home in Dyersburg, Tennessee. The disappearance of Karen set off an alarm among the authorities and sparked a massive search effort. Karen's SUV was discovered abandoned nearby with a flat tire. This sparked suspicion, as no signs of forced entry or a struggle existed.
Do you feel like it is likely that the jury, on continued deliberations, will reach a verdict?
No, sir.
Karen Swift's husband, David, was questioned by the authorities and offered his assistance. However, his story painted a troubling picture of their marriage. According to David, he and Karen initially married in 1989. They had 2 sons together, but the marriage ended in divorce after David admitted to having an affair. Despite the separation, David claimed that he and Karen reunited and eventually remarried.
This is video of him coming out of that courtroom just minutes ago. When they found her body in December of 2011, that was 6 weeks after someone reported her missing.
This second marriage produced 2 daughters, but their marital troubles continued. When pressed by the detectives, David speculated that Karen may have been experiencing a midlife crisis. He claimed she had recently expressed dissatisfaction with her life and hinted at wanting to change.
It's now considered a cold case. As we've reported, the 44-year-old mother of 4 went missing after a Halloween party in 2011.
6 weeks after Karen went missing, her skeletal remains were discovered under a tree in the local graveyard. The forensic examination revealed she had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Karen's manner of death was ruled a homicide, triggering a desperate search for answers.
Now, talking to people off camera, they've remained quiet, wanting to keep Karen Swift's memory alive. Now, despite this new information in this autopsy report, many people say this is a tragic story.
The detectives focused their attention on Karen's husband, David Swift. They speculated that he killed her because she wanted to leave him again, but lacked sufficient evidence to implicate him in the crime. Despite conducting extensive searches and interviewing potential witnesses, no forensic evidence or witness statements directly linked David to Karen's murder.
To this day, it's unclear if she was sexually assaulted. According to the toxicology report, Swift had Benadryl, Tylenol, and caffeine in her system.
Over time, the investigation into Karen's murder went cold. David Swift moved out of state with his children and remarried. Despite the tragedy, he remained an involved father to his daughter, Ashley. According to Ashley, David continued to provide support and guidance after her mother's death.
Last month, David Swift was on trial for the murder of his wife, Karen Swift, in 2011. Karen Swift's body was found in a cemetery near Dyersburg.
However, new leads emerged after a cold case team reopened Karen's case. Detectives soon felt as if they had finally uncovered enough evidence to arrest David and charge him with her murder. In 2022, David Swift was arrested for murdering his wife, Karen.
But I'll be surprised if they ever try it again. A case of this age, and you can't even get them to agree on voluntary, I would be surprised if the defendant faces a trial again.
As the case unfolded in the courtroom, the fate of David hung in the balance. To the surprise of many, he was found not guilty of first and second-degree murder. Despite the initial acquittal, David's legal troubles were far from over. He is currently awaiting trial on manslaughter charges. David Swift's tale of betrayal and loss revealed the darkness behind his actions. But the next case takes a more violent turn. Colby Allen Parker, a man whose gruesome crimes shocked everyone who heard the details.
Questioned about the death, Colby Parker pulled the human ears from his pocket. CBS affiliate WPEC reports the Lake County Sheriff's Office responded to a home.
In 2021, authorities were called to a residence on reports of a stabbing. What they discovered there shook the community to its core. On the night in question, police officers arrived to find a chaotic situation. As they approached, they were greeted by a gruesome sight. Colby Allen Parker, a young man covered in blood, was frantically trying to explain what had happened.
In Central Florida Saturday night for reports of a man being attacked by his grandfather. According to deputies, Parker claims Wells pulled a knife on him. Parker managed.
As the police carefully approached the scene, they discovered the lifeless body of an older man. This body bore the chilling scars of multiple stab wounds. Further investigation revealed that the older man was Colby's grandfather.
Managed to get the knife away, then used it against Wells in what he called self-defense. Investigators say Parker admitted to cutting his grandfather multiple times.
While officers were examining the grandfather, another officer approached Colby for questioning. According to Colby, the tragic events that unfolded that night started when his grandfather attempted to hurt him. However, Colby managed to seize control of the situation and fatally stabbed his grandfather in the heart. However, the multiple stab wounds on the grandfather's body indicated that this was not a simple altercation.
Other than that, I don't know where Junior is. I asked and he didn't know. So, Junior? Yeah.
After Colby Allen Parker was arrested following a confrontation at the scene, investigators searched his residence where he had lived with his grandfather. During the search of the corner of a room, investigators discovered a disturbing piece of evidence, a bloody baseball bat. Just a few feet away, they found a butcher's knife. The blade was smeared with blood, still dripping onto the cold floor.
Where's Junior? Ronnie Jr. right here. Ronnie, okay, what is that?
Those are ears.
Further investigation led the police to charge Colby with second-degree murder and assaulting an officer. The severity of the charges further highlighted the severity of his actions. More details will be revealed as the case unfolds, shedding light on the chilling events in Colby's home. Colby Allen Parker's gruesome crime was horrifying, but the next case unveils a chilling story of rage and devastation. James Collar, a man whose uncontrollable anger led to a catastrophic act of violence against his own family.
To all-American family by friends and neighbors in Weatherford, Texas, a quiet bedroom community of Fort Worth.
They were something else in their little town.
James Collar, his wife Karen, and their 3 children. Emily, Lauren, and Sean lived a seemingly happy life in Weatherford, Texas. Those around them described the Callers as the perfect family. They enjoyed spending time together, creating memories that would last a lifetime.
Of two beautiful teenage daughters, Emily and Lauren, and a toddler named Sean.
Emily was the firstborn, and she...
As the summer of 2008 approached, James was presented with an exciting opportunity. He was offered a job in the state of Missouri. James couldn't resist the chance to advance his career, so he made the difficult decision to leave Texas behind.
The Kaler family was living the dream. But Lynn says that although Craig and Karen appeared to be still in love after more than 20 years of marriage,
as James prepared to embark on a new life in Missouri, Karen approached him with a confession. She revealed that she had developed a romantic interest in a female coworker. To James's surprise, Karen requested a sexual relationship with her coworker. James allegedly consented to this arrangement, unaware of the consequences that lie ahead.
Met and fallen for at the gym where they both worked.
My theory is Karen was so beaten down for so long.
James believed that Karen's affair with her coworker would end by the time he relocated to Missouri. However, his hopes were shattered when he realized that the affair persisted. This betrayal deepened when James attended a New Year's Eve party in Texas, where he witnessed firsthand the blatant flirting between Karen and her coworker. The sight humiliated him, leaving him hurt and angry.
Are said to have become so inseparable that Karen told Craig about their affair. And her husband reportedly not only approved of it, but actually encouraged Karen to continue seeing Sonny.
After that night, Karen filed for divorce. In March 2009, Karen filed a battery complaint against her husband, James. This incident led to James's arrest and a turn of events that would forever change their lives. The media quickly caught wind of James's arrest, and the story became headline news.
Jealous, allegedly, that Craig took a new, even higher-paying government job in Columbia, Missouri, and moved Karen and their daughters into an even nicer home there just to get his wife away from his love rival, Sonny.
The case generated immense attention, and the fallout for James was swift and severe. He lost his job and found himself facing the consequences of his actions. Faced with the aftermath of James's arrest, Karen decided to move herself and her 3 children from the family home. They sought a fresh start in a new environment, away from the toxicity of the situation. Meanwhile, James went to live with his parents in Kansas.
Visiting her grandmother, 89-year-old Dorothy White, at her farm on Thanksgiving weekend.
During this time, James made it his mission to win Karen back. He worked tirelessly to repair the damage he had done, but to no avail. Frustrated and desperate, James decided to take drastic measures to humiliate Karen in public. He embarked on a campaign to destroy her public image and invade her privacy. James sought to expose Karen's secret and tarnish her reputation by hacking into her computer.
The grandmother calls her emergency alert service, saying a gunman has just burst into her home, firing at anything that moved.
On November 29, 2009, Karen, Emily, Lauren, and Sean made the fateful decision to visit Karen's grandmother, Dorothy White, at her house in Burlingame, Kansas. At around the same time, James Caller, armed with a deadly weapon, drove from Meridian to Burlingame. His destination? Dorothy White's home.
The alarmed operator can hear gunfire in the background.
James entered Dorothy's house at 6 p.m. Karen was in the kitchen with her son, Sean. Without hesitation, James raised his firearm and shot Karen, leaving her unconscious on the kitchen floor. In an instant, the house was filled with chaos.
She was on the floor, on her back. She didn't look like she was breathing or had a pulse.
As he continues through the house, Deputy Perling finds Emily also apparently dead in the living room.
As the echoes of the gunshots reverberated through the house, Sean ran for his life. In a stroke of luck, he managed to escape to a nearby neighbor's home. With a chilling determination, James made his way to the living room where Dorothy White and his teenage daughter Emily stood. James pulled the trigger, ending her life in cold blood. Lauren, James's other teenage daughter, was upstairs, unaware of the horrors unfolding downstairs. James ended her life too. Dorothy White's life alert bracelet, triggered by her unresponsive state, alerted emergency services. The police were summoned to the scene, where they arrived to find Karen, unconscious but alive, on the kitchen floor. Dorothy and Lauren were also alive, but just barely. They identified the shooter as James Caller.
44-year-old Karen had also been killed in a horrifying Thanksgiving holiday massacre. But 89-year-old grandmother Dorothy was still alive, as was Emily's younger sister Lauren, who was 16.
Emily was pronounced dead at the scene. Karen, Dorothy, and Lauren were rushed to the hospital, but their injuries were beyond saving. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, all three succumbed to their injuries, leaving behind a shattered family and a community in mourning.
As you, I'm sure, can well understand. And I messed up.
Keeler refuses to talk to detectives at the station about the day of his family's massacre.
James Collar was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. His defense team argued that he was not responsible for his actions due to mental illness. They presented psychiatric evaluations and testimony from expert witnesses to support their claim. The defense argued that James was suffering from severe depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder, which impaired his judgment and led him to commit the crime. The prosecution, on the other hand, presented a strong case against James Collar. They argued that Collar planned and premeditated the murders, motivated by anger and revenge. Ultimately, the jury sided with the prosecution. The judge sentenced him to death. His legal team has filed multiple appeals, seeking to have his sentence commuted or overturned. However, he remains on death row. Next, we move to the case of Gabe Watson, whose actions sparked outrage and disbelief.
I also told her that if she had any doubts about this, she didn't have to do it.
Do you, Gabe and Tina,
And she told me, she said, Dad, this is going to be a good day. This is what I want.
will bind you as husband and wife?
Christina Tina Thomas began dating David Gabriel Gabe Watson while they were both studying at the University of Alabama, Birmingham in January 2001. Just a short time later, the couple became engaged and tied the knot on October 11, 2003. Around the same time, Tina obtained her diving certificate, while Gabe was already a qualified certified driver with significant experience. In fact, he had already completed an impressive 55 dives by the time he and Tina married.
This home video of a happy newlywed couple packing for their honeymoon in Australia is one of the last images of Tina Watson alive.
With their newfound love for diving, Gabe and Tina decided to plan a romantic getaway for their honeymoon. Their destination was the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, where they planned a diving adventure of a lifetime. Their dream was to dive into the notorious SS Yongala, a shipwreck that sank in 1911. However, a couple of details posed a challenge. Gabe had limited open ocean diving experience, while Tina had never dived in the ocean or below 9 meters.
Prosecutors began the trial this week by showing jurors this photo of Tina lying lifeless on the ocean floor. As shown in this Australian police reenactment video, the prosecution...
On October 22, 2004, at 10:30 p.m., Gabe and Tina embarked on a diving excursion at the site of the shipwreck. Tina soon became unconscious and sank to the bottom of the ocean. Gabe claimed he was overwhelmed by the strength of the current and the speed of Tina's descent and unable to hold on to her. In a desperate attempt to save her life, Gabe claimed that he immediately sought help from others.
And believes Watson killed his new bride by turning off her air supply on her scuba tank and then holding her in a bear hug while she suffocated.
Gabe alerted a dive instructor at the surface to what had happened. The instructor quickly sprang into action and searched for Tina in the water. 10 minutes after Tina went underwater, the instructor found her lifeless body. Despite 40 minutes of attempts to resuscitate her, Tina's fate was sealed. The medical examiner determined that she died from drowning.
The defense argues that scenario is impossible and that Tina's death is a tragic accident.
Two inexperienced divers and a perfect storm.
As the authorities began their investigation, evidence emerged that suggested Gabe might have played a role in Tina's death. The Queensland police discovered inconsistencies in Gabe's story and the official record of his actions stored by his dive computer. According to the prosecutors, they believed that Gabe turned off Tina's regulator, held her underwater, and then reversed his actions by turning the air back on when she passed him, allowing her to sink into the depths of the ocean.
And that she began to sink in the deep water. He says he signaled to her to inflate her buoyancy vest to help her stay afloat, but that she couldn't. He then took her hand and tried to pull her along.
Tina's father, devastated by his daughter's death, put forth his claims during the inquest. He alleged that Gabe had asked Tina right before the couple's marriage to increase her life insurance policy and make him the sole beneficiary. This revelation raised suspicions about Gabe's intentions and the motive behind Tina's murder.
Gabe, are you confident you'll walk out of here in the end? Come on.
Easy, guys. Half a world away from the scene of his alleged crime, Gabe Watson is facing justice again.
After an exhaustive investigation, the Queensland police determined that there was sufficient evidence to charge Gabe with the murder of his wife, Tina. On June 19, 2008, Gabe was officially charged with murder.
Defense says Gabe Watson is a victim too.
This is a tragic case, and what's even more tragic is the blame of Gabe that he has had to live with.
Gabe Watson has the support of his new wife.
In 2009, Gabe traveled to Australia to face trial, where he pleaded not guilty to the charge of manslaughter. However, he was found guilty and was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Gabe's jail time was suspended after 1 year, leaving Tina's family outraged.
Something seriously wrong, and I thought, I don't know anything about how to get down there and get her and me up safely.
After Gabe finished serving his sentence in Australia, prosecutors in Alabama charged him with murder and kidnapping. They claimed that they had evidence indicating that Gabe had planned to murder Tina while still residing in the United States. However, an Alabama judge ruled that the evidence was inadmissible, leading to Gabe's acquittal on February 23, 2012. Gabe was acquitted without the defense ever presenting their case. Gabe Watson's case of betrayal and tragedy shocked many. But the next story delves even deeper into the darkness of relationships. Elise Matsunaga, a woman whose crime involved a chilling act of violence against her own husband.
New docuseries, Elise Matsunaga, Once Upon a Crime, has managed to generate so much buzz. In 2012, the wealthy businessman Marcos Kitano Matsunaga, it was Elise who was responsible. In the years that followed, the slaying of Matsunaga became one of Brazil's most sensationalized and debated cases, particularly Elise's murder trial.
In May 2012, Elise returned home from a trip with her aunt to find that she had some bad news awaiting her. While she was away, she hired a private investigator to follow around Marcos, her husband, and gather evidence that he had cheated on her. Unfortunately, her suspicions were confirmed by the investigator's findings.
Not only that, but the documentary offers an unprecedented insight into the mind of a convicted killer whose guilt is never in doubt and who looks back on the tragic circumstances.
Faced with the reality that her husband had been involved in extramarital affairs, Elise decided to take matters into her own hands. During a dinner at home, she confronted Marcos about his infidelity, igniting a fiery exchange between the two. According to Elise, Marcos told her that he was leaving her and taking their children while also threatening to put her in a psychiatric hospital.
For the consequences until this day. Once Upon a Crime's extended interviews with Elise give the series the feeling of a confessional, that the killer is being honest about their crimes.
During the argument, Elise reached for one of the couple's hunting guns stored in the house. In a panic, she aimed the weapon at Marcos and pulled the trigger, killing him instantly. Following the shooting, Elise reported her husband missing to local law enforcement. She portrayed herself as a grief-stricken wife, desperately searching for answers. But little did they know Elise was hiding a dark secret.
However, not everyone is convinced. The set piece that has ensured Once Upon a Crime turns heads is, of course, the interview with Elise herself.
As the investigation progressed, Elise's guilt began to take its toll. Unable to bear the weight of her actions any longer, she confessed to murdering her husband. During Elise's trial, the prosecution alleged that Elise had plotted and executed a murder of passion, fueled by her anger towards Marcos's alleged infidelity,
which took place in 2019 during an unsupervised furlough from her prison sentence, a right all Brazilian prisoners have, according to The Independent.
However, Elise's defense attorneys presented a different story. They argued that she had acted in self-defense, claiming that Marcos posed a threat to her life. After months of intense legal proceedings, the jury found Elise guilty of acting in self-defense. However, they also determined that her actions had crossed the threshold of the law. The judge sentenced her to 19 years and 1 month in prison.
Her argues that the series effectively absolves the killer of blame, and thus, in light of court findings, is fundamentally flawed in its approach.
Elise's time behind bars was not without hope. In 2019, her sentence was reduced by another year and 9 months. This reduction in sentence was attributed to her good behavior and progress in rehabilitation. Just 2 years later, her sentence was reduced once again, leaving her with a final sentence of 16 years and 3 months. Despite her confinement, Elise is not completely cut off from the outside world. She has been granted permission to spend 1 week each month outside of prison walls. The shocking stories of these viral family killers reveal the darkest depths of betrayal and violence. But there's even more to uncover. More cases that will leave you speechless and courtroom moments that will stay with you long after. Watch the next video now to dive into even more jaw-dropping crimes and unbelievable reactions.